This Valentine's Day, I thought I would discuss human population and climate change. What a better topic to be talking about on V-Day. I've been wanting to discuss this topic since seeing Elon Musk's recent statements pertaining to the declining birth rate among particularly Western nations. And with this being a channel diving into issues and solutions within the climate crisis, I want to look at what projections actually are of the human population and what it means for the planet. So grab your assorted beverage and let's get started. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, where we look at climate news and solutions. If you're new here, welcome. Every week, or every other week, I publish a climate recap where I look at all the climate news that happened in the last 2 weeks since the last climate recap. And then on the other weeks, I do deep dives into different aspects of the climate crisis to explore where we can improve. If all of this sounds interesting to you, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you know every single time I post. And if you are a regular Beckispherean, thank you so much for coming back. You are absolutely amazing and you are the reason why I do this. Okay, so let's take a look at what Mr. Musk said about birth rate. Quote, "I think one of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate. And yet, so many people, including smart people, think that there are too many people in the world and think that the population is growing out of control. It's completely the opposite. Please look at the numbers. If people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble, mark my words." Okay, well you heard him. Let's look at the numbers. Because it's unclear what civilization he's referring to, let's start with the country where Tesla Boy and I both reside, which is the US of A. And Rue resides there too. A CDC report in May of 2021 found that the US birth rate fell by 4% from 2019 to 2020, the sharpest single-year decline in nearly 50 years and the lowest number of births since 1979. The drop was pretty evenly spread amongst the three largest demographics, those being non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic blacks, and Hispanic people. And the drop was also pretty evenly split amongst the three largest age brackets, those being 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and 30 to 34. Wow, I'm in a new age bracket. Now, birth rates are also a great symptom of larger systemic issues. It's quite common for things like economic downturns and social unrest to result in less children as people don't feel comfortable or able to have kids at that time. A global pandemic would definitely do that. But the pandemic-fueled birth rate drop has highlighted the slow downward trend of US birth rates in general. The US's birth rate has been falling for the last 6 years. Our birth rate is expected to fall from 1.7 to 1.5 babies per woman by 2100, both of which are below the replacement rate, which is at 2.1 kids per woman. This is about 20% of women choosing not to have kids. And this is particularly due to parents wanting to wait longer to have kids and usually have less kids in favor of education and career paths. Notice that the largest age bracket is 30 to 34 for having kids, which is in line with how an increase in women's education results in them waiting longer in their lifetime to have kids. Increasing women's education and access to family planning methods, which is part of a developing society, commonly results in a decrease in birth rate because women choose to focus on education and work. I think we're also seeing a slow cultural shift towards allowing a child-free life to be an acceptable option, despite what Pope Francis has to say. But as I said, a declining birth rate is a great symptom for larger systemic issues. For example, child rearing support in the US is abysmal. Only 23% of women working in private industries have access to paid maternity leave, which is usually only about 8 weeks long. Paternal leave is way less common. On top of that, housing prices in many areas are insane, work time is usually not flexible at all, and everything from fertility processes to childcare to higher education, it's all super expensive. People make it work, but man, I don't blame people for wanting to have pause. A lot of women have left the workforce during the pandemic because there's still more responsibility on women to take care of children and aging parents than on men. What I found interesting is that a Gallup survey found that Americans still on average want 2.5 kids. So it's not so much of a matter of interest as a matter of access and capability. So simply telling people to have more kids doesn't solve the underlying reasons why they're choosing not to. Other countries whose populations are falling much faster than the US are trying to pay people to have children. Greece, which in 2011 actually became the first country to report a population decline ever, could see their population half in the next 50 years. According to the World Population Review, the main reasons for this decline is a birth rate of 1.3 births per woman, financial crisis, emigration, and an aging population. Most of the top shrinking countries are shrinking because emigration due to lack of opportunities. Just keep that in mind as we look at some of the other countries that are decreasing in population size. The main reason why the birth rate is so low in Greece is increased education for women, but also an economic crisis and increased unemployment for women. In 2020, the government began paying people 2,000 euros per birth and upgrading the country's nurseries. And they even said in 2019 that they will pay people to live in one of their islands. But most of these moves didn't really fix the economic problems, making people hesitant to have more kids or emigrate elsewhere. And I'm sorry, but 2,000 euros, I know that's like $2,200 or something like that. That's nothing compared to how expensive it is to raise a kid. Another example is Japan. Japan's population dropped by the biggest margin between 2020 and 2021 since 2013. The main reasons for their population decline, besides the pandemic of course, is a restrictive immigration policy and a falling birth rate, down to 1.4 births per woman. Over 20% of Japan's population is over 65 years old, which is a very large percentage compared to other countries. The main reason the birth rate is so low is because there's a lack of economic opportunity for young people. 20% of young Japanese men remain unmarried compared to 11% of young women. And many jobs men have are considered temporary, which doesn't provide the stability to start a family. Like in the US, there's still uneven childcare expectations between men and women in Japan, making women more hesitant to start a family for fear that that would halt their careers. Sorry, my cat's eating in the background. He always does that. He's really good at that. In November, the country announced that it would open its borders to more blue-collar immigrants to find permanent residence in Japan. Now over to Italy, where the Pope is concerned about shrinking birth rates, resulting him in declaring that people should have more kids and avoid a demographic winter. Italy's population is expected to drop by 10.1% between now and 2050. The main reason for this drop is a combination between Italians leaving to other European countries for better job opportunities and the birth rate being below the replacement level at 1.46 births per woman due to a decrease in teen pregnancies, increased education in women, and a lack of economic opportunities for young adults. Though actually the birth rate has increased since the birth rate was actually 1.19 in the mid-90s. So they actually are improving. Well, they improved then. I don't think they're improving still, but you know what I mean. So as you can see, many countries with shrinking populations have similar reasons why their populations are shrinking, which suggests a larger set of issues that we need to tackle that go way beyond just paying people to have more kids. An increasing fear over climate change is threatening to drop birth rates even more. Celebrities like Miley Cyrus and Seth Rogen have chosen to live child-free lives, citing human impact on the environment and worsening environmental disaster. Prince Harry cited climate change as the reason why he will only have 2 kids. The #birth strike movement trended in 2019 as people around the world vowed not to have children until they see major climate action, some men going as far as getting vasectomies in the name of climate action. A 2018 New York Times study found that 33% of young Americans surveyed cited climate change as the reason why they plan to have fewer kids. 27% said population growth was the main concern. A detailed survey of 600 people between ages 27 and 45 revealed that of those who are concerned about climate change, 60% are worried about environmental footprint of having a kid, and 96% are worried about the children's future. Allow me to deviate from talking about a shrinking birth rate to look at those two arguments for choosing a child-free life for the climate. Let's start with the environmental footprint concern, which relates to the discussion around human population and the environment in general. Elon Musk's comment, it's wrong and it's right at the same time, and let me explain why. In 1968, the book The Population Boom by Paul Ehrlich, a Stanford entomologist, was published. And for context, entomologists study bugs. And that's incredibly important when you look at how he got his human population projections and results. Basically, he was acting like we're bugs. We're not. As 1986 began, Paul Ehrlich was an entomologist at Stanford University, known to his peers for his groundbreaking studies of coevolution of flowering plants and butterflies, but almost unknown to the average person. That was about to change. In May, Ehrlich released a quickly written, cheaply bound paperback, The Population Bomb. Initially, it was ignored, but over time, Ehrlich's traction would sell millions of copies and turn its author into a celebrity. It would become one of the most influential books of the 20th century, and one of the most heatedly attacked. The first sentence set the tone, quote, "The battle to feed all humanity is over," and humanity had lost. In the 1970s, the book promised, quote, "Hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death. No matter what people do, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world's death rate." Published at a time of tremendous conflict and social upheaval, Ehrlich's book argued that many of the day's most alarming events had a single underlying cause: too many people packed into too tight spaces, taking too much from the earth. Unless humanity cut down its numbers, soon all of us would face mass starvation on a dying planet. Ehrlich, now 85, told me recently that the book's main contribution was to make population control acceptable as a topic of debate. But the book did far more than that. It gave a huge jolt to the nascent environmental movement and fueled an anti-population growth crusade that led to human rights abuses around the world. The concern about overpopulation did exist before that, with Ehrlich saying that he was inspired by a book published in 1948. But his book was the first to really capture the global public concern. It shifted the environmental conversation from the consumption issue to the population issue, allowing people in developed countries to avoid responsibility for their consumption and instead point to the higher birth rates in developing countries as the problem. It is true that in the book, Ehrlich exhorted readers to remember that his scenarios, quote, are just possibilities, not predictions. But it is also true that he slipped into the language of prediction occasionally in the book, and more often in other settings. Quote, "Most of the people who are going to die in the greatest cataclysm in the history of man have already been born," he promised in a 1969 magazine article. "Sometime in the next 15 years, the end will come," Ehrlich told CBS News a year later. And by the end, I mean an utter breakdown of the capacity of the planet to support humanity. Such statements contributed to a wave of population alarm then sweeping the world. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Population Council, the World Bank, the United Nations Population Fund, the Hugh Moore-backed Association for Voluntary Sterilization, and other organizations promoted and funded programs to reduce fertility in poor places. Quote, "The results were horrific," says Betsy Harmon, author of Reproductive Rights and Wrongs, a classic 1987 expose on the anti-population crusade. Some population control programs pressured women to use only certain mandated contraceptives. In Egypt, Tunisia, Pakistan, South Korea, and Taiwan, healthcare workers' salaries were, in a system inviting abuse, dictated by the number of IUDs they inserted into women. In the Philippines, birth control pills were initially pitched out of helicopters hovering over remote villages. I'm sorry, imagine having, freaking birth control coming at you from the sky. Jesus. Millions of people were sterilized, often coercively, sometimes illegally, frequently in unsafe conditions, in Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. In the 1970s and 80s, India, led by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay, embraced policies that in many states required sterilization for men and women to obtain water, electricity, ration cards, medical care, and pay raises. Teachers could expel students from school if their parents weren't sterilized. More than 8 million men and women were sterilized in 1975 alone. Quote, "At long last," World Bank head Robert McManary remarked, "India is moving to effectively address its population problem." For its part, China adopted a one-child policy that led to huge numbers, possibly 100 million, of coerced abortions, often in poor conditions contributing to infection, sterility, and even death. Millions of forced sterilizations occurred. Because boys were more valued than girls, many Chinese baby girls were put up for adoption, aborted, or killed, resulting in a big gap in eligible Chinese women today and increasing the pressure of men to own property to be considered eligible. The panic did also drop the birth rates in the US, bringing us pretty much to the 2.5 kid ideal we still seem to want on average today. Crazy thing is that all these measures made to decrease human population didn't improve environmental issues, though the famines and mass die-off, God, I hate his name, and the mass die-offs that Paul predicted didn't happen either. Those pushes didn't make much impact because they centered around decreasing the populations of developing countries and poor people. Basically people who make a substantially smaller footprint than the medium or higher income people in higher income countries. Most people in the birth strike movement do recognize now that footprint differences between income brackets matter, but they still argue that choosing not to have a kid, particularly in developed countries, is the single biggest way to reduce your carbon footprint. I actually remember being handed an infographic in an environmental workshop in college, and it did actually make me consider not having a kid for the reason of the environmental footprint. People supporting this message say that it's selfish to want to have your own biological kid. And instead, if you want to be a parent, you should adopt instead because the kid is already in the world. As someone who has always wanted to have kids and actually go through the process of being pregnant and everything, this argument's really difficult for me because again, I did agree with this for a while, but I just want to challenge it for a sec. Firstly, does it really make sense for a children's emissions to count as the parents' emissions? I suppose having a kid was the parent's decision, but is the argument implying that you as a parent are responsible for the emissions of your child throughout their lifetime, even after you're gone? I don't know if that really makes sense. Second, if an environmentally conscious person is having a kid, wouldn't that mean that you're helping create a more environmentally conscious next generation? If only the people who didn't care about the environment were the ones that had kids, I kind of think that we might not be off to a great start for the next generation. Third, I think that it's wonderful to adopt, but the current adoption system is expensive and challenging to navigate, so I don't blame people for wanting to do the biological route instead. 4, the population size of places where people are making the birth strike argument are already shrinking due to all the factors I mentioned earlier. So is discouraging someone who really wants to be a parent from having a kid really better than continuing to increase access to family planning to reduce the number of unplanned pregnancies? Increasing access to family planning and educating women are effective methods of decreasing the human population size and thereby increasing humanity's global footprint. They're numbers 78 and 80 respectively on the top climate solutions presented in Drawdown, aka the Climate Solutions Bible. I have it right here. Fifth, the emissions you've saved by not having a kid will get cashed in later than the timeline we would need to decrease our global footprint to reduce the worst impacts of climate change. So I think it's a good move for the environment to decide to have a smaller family, like to just have 2 kids to hit the replacement rate and then call it a day. Overall, it's a shame because the whole population bomb thing framed how human population relates to environmental issues in basically the worst way. Put simply, Musk is wrong about human population not being an issue because it's a threat multiplier. The more people there are, the more resources are being taken up. But at the same time, he's right because the population growth is not out of control and is expected to stabilize during this century. A recent Lancet study found that for the first time in centuries, a decrease in world's population is in sight. The researchers think that we will be peaking around 2064 at 9.7 billion people. We're currently at 7.8 billion people. And then the population is expected to drop down to 8.8 billion people. So it's still a net rise from where we are now, but it will eventually decrease from its peak. Around the world, the average number of babies a woman is having in her lifetime has dropped from 2.12 in 2007 to 1.64 in 2020. Up to 23 countries could see their populations shrink by more than 50%, the largest drops happening in the United Arab Emirates, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, and Latvia. The most populous country, China, could see a fall in its population from 1.4 billion in 2017 to 732 million in 2100. So the vast majority of the human population growth from now to 2064 is actually going to be taking place in sub-Saharan Africa. Niger, Chad, South Sudan, Samoa, and Mali are expected to see the biggest baby booms in this century. Nigeria could become the second largest economic hub in the world by 2100. What's interesting is that we're already seeing a dramatic drop in fertility across Africa, with the birth rate dropping from 6.6 children per woman in the 1980s to 4.5 children per woman in 2017. Now, 4.5 is still the highest birth rate in the world, but African countries are still in the earlier stages of development. Infant mortality is still higher on this continent than in other parts of the world, while the age range is shorter and the rate of women's education is still lower. Increased education and economic opportunities will drop the birth rate further in the coming decades, while the increased access to medical care will increase lifespans and decrease infant and childbirth mortalities. So it makes sense that sub-Saharan Africa will finish off the human population growth. All that being said, climate change will make it harder to live in parts of Africa and parts of the rest of the world for that matter, which leads me into another concern that people who are choosing not to have kids due to climate change are arguing for. Is it unfair to bring children into a warming world? The human health impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly documented. According to UNICEF, approximately 1 billion children are in an extremely high risk of impacts of climate crisis, including severe drought or flooding, air pollution from wildfires and fossil fuels, drinking water scarcity due to drought and contamination, and less access to nutritional food due to changes in agricultural capabilities. Climate change is also increasing mental health issues in children, whether it be concern of the future, worsening living conditions, trauma from extreme weather events, or an increased mental health issue associated with hotter temperatures. I think this child-free Potter in Canada describes how many birth strikers feel when she said, quote, "Harnessing the love that I have for my unborn hypothetical kid comforts me in sparing them an unhospitable future. In this way, my choice feels like an act of love." Bottom line, I totally understand and respect the sentiment that it's not a good time to bring a child into this world. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said in a 2019 speech about the climate crisis, quote, "I speak to you as a human being, a woman whose dreams of motherhood now taste bittersweet because of what I know about our children's future." That's basically how I feel. I totally respect people choosing not to have children because of an uncertain future. But as someone who has always wanted to be a mom, I'm kind of choosing to pick my mental health on this one. I've cried many times over this dilemma, thinking that maybe I'm selfish for wanting to bring a kid into the world. But there's so many other ways that I can help the climate movement, and you just gotta pick your battles, basically. Let me know if any of you feel similar in the comments below. I'd be really interested to know what your thought process is with this. Climate change and causes of climate change might actually drop our population further, whether we like it or not. It will increase the risk of future pandemics due to an increased prevalence of mosquitoes, ticks, and other disease-carrying pests, as well as contaminated water. Childhood asthma is on the rise from increased air and chemical pollution. Air pollution accounts for 20% of newborn deaths worldwide, mostly relating to complications with low birth weight and premature birth. Wildfire smoke likely causes increased pregnancy complications. Phthalates in plastics are decreasing the human penis size and has dropped sperm count in the West by 59% between 1973 and 2011. If you want to learn more about other ways that plastics might harm fetal development, check out Onkar Shah's latest video on that. And that brings me back to population decline and whether it's a problem for civilization. With our current economic structures relying on constant economic growth, having less people consuming resources will cause economic downturns for sure. There is also the problem with an aging population. The decrease in births means that there will be a huge shift in the global age structure over the next 80 years. It's estimated that 2.37 billion individuals will be over 65 years old globally by 2100, compared with 1.7 billion people under 20 years old. People over 65 will represent 1/8 of the world's population by 2030, the largest percentage in history. People over 85 represent the fastest growing demographic. This aging trend brings me to another Elon Musk quote from that same conversation from the previous quote that I haven't mentioned yet. Quote, "I think it is important for us to die because most of the times people don't change their minds, they just die. If they live forever, then we might become a very ossified society where new ideas cannot succeed." So he's actually more concerned about increasing the birth rate because he thinks that an aging population will reduce progressiveness, so he'd rather there be a faster turnover rate. That's a take. I understand the concern about having only old people in charge will hurt human progress. I mean, look at the US right now. But I don't think reversing our progress of increasing longevity is the answer. Maybe we should consider putting a maximum age limit on public office jobs, or encouraging people to go back to school or change their work paths later in life. It's not like older people are incapable of appreciating progress. I just think that it should be more socially acceptable to change career paths and to change our minds. That being said, there is a reason to be concerned of our current economies not being able to handle a smaller workforce with less overall consumption paired with more people living off pensions and Social Security. Right now, Europe has 4 working people for every older person, but it's expected to drop to a 2-to-1 ratio by 2050. The aging population can be a problem if we don't prepare for it. More older adults within a population paired with a decrease in the number of children they have to support them means that we need to rethink our Social Security and care programs. A collaborative paper between the National Institute of Aging, the National Institutes of Public Health, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the U.S. State Department argued for a reprioritization of multi-generational homes when possible. We will also need better disability accommodations because even though we live longer, we still fall apart. Quote, continued global population growth through the century is no longer the most likely trajectory for the world's population. This study, which is the Lancet study, provides governments of all countries an opportunity to start rethinking their policies on migration, workforces, and economic development to understand the challenges presented by demographic change. Many experts argue that more progressive immigration policies could stabilize a country's population, even if longtime citizens are having less kids. For example, the researchers in the study I mentioned earlier predict that the US could still be the largest economy in 2098 despite a declining birth rate, and this is mainly due to immigration. We know some of the main impacts of climate change will cause mass human migration over the century too. Sea level rise, extreme heat, flooding, and wildfires are going to make places long inhabited by humans no longer inhabitable. So progressive immigration policies are essential for the survival of our species, honestly, and improving these policies will help both climate adaptation and shrinking population problems. Another concern people have relating to shrinking populations is nationalism-based. This same way of thinking is also behind some of the most strict immigration policies. For example, Japan was only letting people in Latin America move full-time to Japan if they were descendants from Japanese immigrants. While there will always be growing pains with increased immigration, we need to take a closer look within ourselves to see why immigration makes us uncomfortable. I think it's important to preserve culture, but culture can travel with people, hence why America is so culturally diverse. If we are concerned about our country's shrinking population, but also are not open to increasing immigration, then we might want to take a step back and look at why we are uncomfortable about increasing immigration. Are we only interested in preserving our country if people continue to look the same way? The shrinking populations of developing countries also further supports the need to rethink our economic systems. Relying on constant economic growth isn't sustainable from a consumption perspective, and it really isn't possible with stable population sizes. I do want to do a whole other video looking at alternative methods to the GDP for rating the success of countries, because there might be some better options out there. Okay, so we just went on this whole journey. So to summarize, Elon is right about human population control not being as big of an issue as many people think. Human population size does multiply the environmental damage we do as a species, but our size is expected to stabilize over this century, and resource consumption matters more than the size itself. However, because the top 10% of rich countries have by far the largest environmental impact, the richest man in the world choosing to have 6 kids really doesn't help the situation much. But will civilization collapse because global birth rates have gone down? Well, no, not if we adjust our economic systems to thrive with a smaller workforce and an older population average. The birth rate will stabilize if we address the underlying economic, social, and environmental reasons why people are choosing to have less or no kids. Climate change is a growing factor for this, and it, along with chemical pollution, will further decrease our fertility rates. So if you want to increase the birth rate, maybe tackle the climate crisis instead of just telling people to get pregnant. Lastly, here's a quick list of different ways that we can stabilize our population sizes and prepare for an older and smaller population. Increase access to better family planning methods. Increase access to paid parental leave and childcare services. Increase pay for essential workers. Increased equal parenting expectations. Easier adoption processes. Easier access to education. More flexible work schedules, especially for parents. More progressive immigration laws. Climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. Restructured economy to value quality over quantity and ideas over production. Decreased chemical pollution. Better health care services, increased cultural preservation and practice, increased disability accommodations, increased access to and acceptance of retraining / going back to school / changing careers later in life, better access to senior care, reduced overall cost of living, and rethinking social services and pension programs. And increased pet adoptions. Okay, now you can go. If we do all of those things and then just kind of let the chips fall where they may, I have a feeling that it will result in a smaller but more resilient species. Did I miss any of the solutions that you think would help humanity adjust to a more sustainable future with a smaller, older population? Or do you disagree with me on some of the points I've made? Please let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. I know I covered a lot of heated topics in this, so please be respectful of each other, but continue the conversation. Respond to each other. I'm very interested to see what you all have to say. Remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. Until next time, follow the advice of my new tattoo and just keep swimming.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dorino singing.
Thank you to all the people on Patreon who helped me pay for my equipment and the many news subscriptions that make the climate recaps possible. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous David H., FK, Norman Anal, Greg H., and Paul B. I greatly appreciate your support. If you would like to support the work I do, feel free to check out the Patreon link in the description below. You can also make a one-time donation using the Buy Me a Coffee link, or simply supporting the algorithm by clicking like and subscribe, commenting on the video, and sharing this video around. No pressure, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time. Bye!